The rise of the Nazis to power in Germany created significant political tension in Europe. With the real possibility of another war breaking out, the British Army received increased funding, allowing for expansion and the acquisition of more military vehicles, such as tanks. During the 1930s, the British Army experimented with several tank concepts. One notable concept was the Cruiser tank, specifically developed for cavalry-like breakthrough exploitation and pursuit operations. These tanks prioritized speed over protection, sacrificing thick armor in favor of improved mobility. To fulfill this role, Cruiser Mk.I and II tanks were first created in the early 1930s, followed by the more refined Cruiser Mk.III, which entered a small production run just as the Second World War began in Europe. Orders for the development of the first cruiser tanks were issued in 1934. The Vickers-Armstrong Company responded with the Cruiser Mk.I and Mk.II. While they generally adhered to the cruiser tank concept, their suspension systems were neither very effective nor well suited for tanks expected to have high mobility. A better suspension capable of greater speed was needed, and inspiration for the new design came from an unexpected source. The vehicle that would serve as a basis for the new British cruiser tank came from a well-known inventor named John Walter Christie. He devised a plan of using a tracked suspension system that incorporated 4 larger road wheels, with the idler in the front and the drive sprocket at the rear. The last road wheel was connected with a chain belt to drive the sprocket and used to provide drive power when the track links were removed. This allowed the suspension to run on wheels alone. The front road wheels were used for steering. During 1928, Christie made great efforts to advertise his new vehicle, especially to the US Army and customers abroad. In 1930, a Soviet delegation inspected the Christie vehicle, and they liked what they saw, ordering 2. These arrived in early 1931 and would serve as the foundation for the latest BT series, which was produced in great numbers. Years later, the British delegation saw these vehicles at military maneuvers held by the Red Army near Kiev during August and September 1936. This delegation included Deputy Director of Mechanization Troops at the Ministry of War, Lieutenant Colonel Gifford Lekesny-Martel. He was a staunch advocate of mechanizing forces and was highly impressed with the Soviet BT series' performance. Martel saw the BTs as a potential solution to the British Army's search for a faster cruiser tank, and even floated the idea of purchasing one tank for testing and evaluation. This, however, would not happen, as the Ministry of War did not want to consider such a purchase from a communist state. The story doesn't end here though. If such a vehicle could not be obtained from the Soviet Union, maybe the original designer in the US would be interested in cooperation. Martel thus sought to negotiate with Christie regarding a potential purchase of one of his tanks. However, lacking the full authority to represent the Ministry of War, Martel harbored concerns that he would be rejected. To get around this issue, he approached a prominent businessman, Lord Nuffield, owner of the Nuffield Company of Morris Commercial Cars. Martel successfully persuaded Mr. Nuffield to reach out to Christie and explore the possibility of striking a deal. After a brief period of negotiation, a deal was struck for the acquisition of a single tank without a turret. The tank, designated as A13E1, arrived at the Mechanization Experimental Establishment in Farnborough in November 1936, where it was used for field testing. There, it displayed promising all-around drive performance. However, the turret ring diameter was deemed too small to accommodate even the smallest British turrets. Still, this deficiency did not pose a significant problem, as British officials were more interested in the suspension than the overall hull design. The tank was then transferred to Morris Company hangars, where it underwent disassembly and meticulous examination. At this juncture, Nuffield's enthusiasm for the project surged, prompting him to insist that his firm take charge in its future development. Consequently, in September 1937, he established a new company, Nuffield Mechanization and Aero Limited. As the company was preparing for the construction of the initial prototype, the scarcity of suitable engines that could power a tank became a serious concern. To expedite development and simultaneously reduce cost, it was decided to repurpose the older Liberty-type aircraft engine. Thanks to the acquired engine and its documentation, Nuffield engineers successfully reverse-engineered it and developed a new, much more modernized model designated as the Nuffield Liberty. The first prototype, designated as A13E2, was completed in October 1937. Despite bearing many similarities to Christie's design, this new prototype introduced a series of alterations tailored to meet the requirements of the British tank concept. Notably, the turret ring was enlarged to accommodate a more spacious turret, necessitating an enlargement of the A13E2's hull. While Christie's vehicles could be driven without tracks, this feature was not well received by the British and was abandoned. A rear-driven sprocket without teeth that moved the tracks was employed instead. In February 1938, another prototype named A13E3 was constructed. This iteration incorporated newly developed domestic tracks, and the rear drive sprocket was equipped with teeth. Following a successful testing of the prototypes, a production order for 65 vehicles was issued in January 1938. Despite delays, the final vehicle was completed by the end of 1939. Once in production, these vehicles were designated as Cruiser Mk.III. The Cruiser Mk.III hull, similar to most other tanks at the time, featured the driver's compartment, which housed the driver and his controls. The fighting compartment was in the middle, and finally, the engine and transmission compartment was in the back. The frontal hull featured 4 small inspection hatches and 1 larger hatch for the driver. The hull, as well as the entire vehicle, was predominantly constructed using bolted armor plates. The Cruiser Mk.III marked a significant milestone for British tanks, as it introduced the Christie suspension. This suspension system comprised 4 large rubber-tired road wheels, a front-mounted idler, and a rear-drive sprocket. Each road wheel was equipped with helical springs positioned inside the combat compartment. This innovative design provided exceptional vertical deflection, ensuring a smoother ride, especially at higher speeds. However, the installation of said springs took up considerable internal hull space. Despite this drawback, the Christie suspension was deemed satisfactory. It proved to be far more suitable for fast-moving tanks compared to the earlier suspension types utilized by the British forces. It was powered by a 340 horsepower Nuffield Liberty engine. With an overall weight of 14.2 tons, this engine enabled the vehicle to achieve a maximum speed of 48 km per hour. At the superstructure forefront, a small box-shaped protrusion housed the protected driver's position. This box featured 3 vision ports, 1 facing forward and 2 covering each side. Moreover, the front plate of this compartment doubled as an escape hatch. Moving towards the rear, the superstructure provided a full enclosure for the engine. Positioned atop it were several access hatches alongside 4 ventilation grilles. The turret was constructed using bolted armor plates, featuring a straightforward box-shaped design with a slight extension towards the rear where the radio equipment was stored. Aside from the primary opening at the front for the main compartment, the turret size lacked additional apertures or vision slits. Positioned atop the turret was a 2-part hatch accompanied by a command cupola located on the left side. Initially, an octagonal cupola was implemented but was subsequently replaced with a round design. In either case, the commander was equipped with 4 observation ports and a 2-part hatch for enhanced visibility and operational control. This vehicle was armed with a 2-pounder gun, shielded by a rounded gun mantlet. It could penetrate approximately 42 mm of armor at a range of nearly 1 km. Contrary to a persistent myth, British tanks armed with such caliber guns were equipped with high explosive rounds. These rounds underwent a limited production run which concluded by mid-1940. Although available, such rounds were rare, leaving the crew to mostly rely on the coaxial 7.7mm Vickers machine gun when engaging enemy infantry or anti-tank emplacements. While initial plans included the installation of a secondary machine gun within the hull, this feature was never implemented on this tank. The main gun's ammunition load consisted of 87 rounds with an additional 3750 for the machine gun. Another weapon option considered but ultimately never installed was the short-barreled 94mm gun. To uphold its high maximum speed, the Cruiser Mk.III sported only light armor protections. Its turret and hull featured armor thicknesses of merely 14mm, with the rear slightly weaker at 12mm, and the bottom at 6. A few units were equipped with an added 14mm spaced turret armor for enhanced defense. Additionally, some vehicles had their turrets fitted with smoke dischargers, offering an extra layer of protection. The Cruiser 3 was crewed by a team of 4, comprising the commander, gunner, loader, and driver. 3 members were housed within the turret, leaving the driver as the sole occupant in the hull. With the German attack on Poland, the Western Allies declared war on September 3, 1939. In anticipation of a potential German attack, the British decided to dispatch the British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, to France in May 1940. This force included armored units, notably the 1st Armored Division with 284 tanks, of which 150 were various cruisers, organized into the 2nd and 3rd Brigades, each further divided into 3 regiments. Rather than being immediately sent to France, the 1st Armored Division was initially stationed in the UK to defend against potential German sea or air invasion. This period was utilized for crew training, and familiarization with the newly introduced cruiser. However, the training process was significantly impeded by a general lack of essential equipment like radios, gunnery optics, and main armaments for many vehicles. Elements of the division began arriving in France on the 17th of May 1940. Even by that time, there were shortages of spare parts, gun sights, and critically, ammunition for the 2-pounders. The chronic shortage of these parts in 1940 was exemplified by an incident where a squadron leader from the 9th Lancers had to clandestinely transport ammunition, sights, and machine guns in a private car, unbeknownst to other units of the 1st Armored Division. As the 1st Armored Division began to arrive, the Allied forces found themselves systematically pushed back towards the Channel coast. Desperately, Allied command sought to assemble a force capable of mounting a counterattack against the exposed German flanks near the Somme River, hoping to stem the tide before all was lost. On May 27th, the 2nd Armored Brigade led the charge, supported by the French 2nd Light Cavalry Division. They were further reinforced by the 3rd Armored Brigade and 5th Light Cavalry Division. Despite an initial advance, the Allies soon found themselves attacking into the fierce German anti-tank fire. The 3.7cm anti-tank guns effortlessly pierced the armor of the British cruiser tanks. Ultimately, the attack was repelled, resulting in significant losses. The British alone lost 65 tanks, including 15 Mk.IIIs. In the aftermath, the surviving British tank units attempted a retreat. The remnants of the 2nd Armored Brigade sought to escape towards Brest, while the 3rd Brigade retreated towards Cherbourg, hotly pursued by the 7th Panzer Division. Upon arrival at Cherbourg, only 14 operational Mk.III tanks remained. Immediately, efforts were made to evacuate as many tanks as possible, but the rapid advance of the German forces allowed for the successful evacuation of only 7 cruisers of all types and 6 light tanks, leaving the majority of vehicles behind. The 3rd Tank Regiment, having been separated from the 1st Armored Division, finally arrived at Calais on May 22, 1940. The following day, a majority of the available tanks were dispatched towards Saint-Omer. There, they encountered formidable German resistance and were forced to retreat. Facing strong enemy resistance, the unit commander decided to evacuate towards Gravelines, albeit at the cost of losing a considerable number of tanks in the process. This was essentially the last action of the British cruiser tanks in France. The surviving Cruiser Mk.IIIs were used as a mobile striking force against a possible German seaborne invasion, which never came. After that, the Mk.III was mainly used for training. In North Africa from 1940 to 41, the initial versions of the cruiser tank saw extensive combat use. While the available sources do not specify the exact types of all cruisers used in this theater of war, at least a few of them may have been Mk.III models. By the end of 1941, all early cruiser tanks were phased out. This concludes our video on the Cruiser Mk.III. What do you think of this British tank? Were they right to import and use the Christie suspension? Share your opinions in the comments section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe and stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions help us create more engaging videos. Until next time, stay focused and stay tuned.